Get up, Riya. That seat is for family. The words were soft. That was what made them cruel. In a hall full of crystal chandeliers, white roses, polished silverware, and people wearing smiles more expensive than honesty, my mother-in-law didn't have to raise her voice to humiliate me. She only had to say one sentence. And suddenly, the air changed. Conversations near the head table slowed. A spoon paused halfway to someone's mouth. A woman in diamonds stopped pretending not to listen. Two businessmen turned their heads just slightly, the way rich people do when they want to witness a public insult without being seen enjoying it. I looked up slowly from the plate I hadn't even touched. My feet were burning. My lower back ached so badly, I could feel it pulsing. I had been standing since before sunrise, fixing one crisis after another at my sister-in-law's engagement celebration. I had solved so many disasters that day that the fact the evening still looked perfect felt almost insulting. The flowers were in place. The candles were lit. The musicians were on cue. The guests were smiling. The bride was glowing. And because everything looked effortless, no one saw the woman who had made effortless possible.
Me.
My mother-in-law, Kamini Sethi, stood beside the table in a deep emerald sari embroidered with gold thread, the kind of woman who had learned years ago that elegance and cruelty could wear the same perfume. Her lips curved into a smile delicate enough to pass for manners. "The staff table is at the back," she said. "I'm sure you'll be more comfortable there."
Staff. Not daughter-in-law.
Not Riya. Not even the woman who had spent 12 hours quietly saving her daughter's event from disaster. Just staff. And the strangest part? For a second, it didn't even hurt. Not because I was strong. Because I was tired. There's a kind of exhaustion so complete that humiliation arrives and finds no energy left to strike. Across the table, my husband looked up. My almost ex-husband, technically, Vikram Sethi. The man I had loved enough to marry. The man I had left 11 months ago. The man whose silence had once broken me more efficiently than any insult. For one suspended moment, I thought I knew exactly what he would do. Nothing. That had been his specialty whenever his family was involved. But then he stood. No announcement. No dramatic expression. He simply pushed his chair back, wrapped one hand around the carved wooden frame, lifted it from the polished floor, and carried it across the ballroom. The room went still. Not quiet. Still. Even the live piano seemed to hesitate. He placed the chair beside mine. Then he sat down next to me and looked at his mother. "If Riya doesn't belong at this table," he said, calm and clear enough for half the room to hear, "then neither do I." No one moved. Not Kamini. Not Naina. Not the cluster of prominent guests suddenly fascinated by their water glasses. Not me. Because in that moment, something much bigger than a chair had shifted. And my mother-in-law knew it. She went pale so quickly that even under the warm lights, everyone saw it. Because less than half an hour earlier, Vikram had learned the truth about what I had secretly prevented that afternoon. A truth I didn't even know myself yet. A truth Kamini had prayed would never reach him. And a truth that, once exposed, would begin tearing the Sethi family apart from the inside. The day had started at 6:10 a.m. with a phone call from a panicking florist. "Ma'am, the refrigeration truck broke down." That was how my mornings usually began. With other people's emergencies landing in my lap before I had even finished my first sip of coffee. I was already dressed when the call came. Not beautifully dressed. Not the version of dressed wealthy guests see when they compliment event planners on looking so put together. I was in black trousers, a cream blouse, my hair twisted into a practical knot, one earring still missing, and my brain already arranging contingency plans like chess moves. "How far?" I asked. "Maybe 40 minutes away. Maybe more. The roses." "Call your backup driver. Send me your live location. Don't touch anything until I tell you." By the time I ended that call, my assistant Megha was sending voice notes fast enough to sound breathless. The stage draping had arrived in the wrong color. The cake artist was stuck in traffic. The printed seating chart had one entire branch of the groom's extended family under the wrong surname. One of the groom's uncles had begun a loud argument over his wife not being listed as doctor on her place card. It was 7 in the morning. The guests wouldn't arrive until evening, and the event was already threatening murder. I reached the venue by 7:15. The ballroom looked like what expensive chaos always looks like before it gets organized. Ladders, cables, boxes, flowers and crates, waiters moving with empty trays, decorators claiming they needed just 20 more minutes, which always means 90. Mega rushed toward me holding 2 files, 3 safety pins, and the expression of a woman who had accepted that God had abandoned event management years ago. "The bride is crying," she said. "The mother of the bride wants the stage wider. The groom's aunt wants the jasmine removed because she says it smells cheap. And the pastry chef says if one more person touches the cake table, he'll walk out." Has he walked out yet?
No.
Then he's staying. I took the file from her. "Where's Nina?" "In the bridal suite. Crying in silk."
Good.
"That means she's dressed, and therefore containable." Mega snorted despite herself. That was the thing about survival in my profession. If you couldn't laugh in disaster, disaster would eat you alive. I walked through the ballroom with the quick, quiet focus that had built my company from one borrowed desk and a cracked laptop into Bellamy Events, a respected boutique planning firm that wealthy families hired when they wanted things flawless, but still expected to speak to me like I should feel grateful for their tone. I checked the flowers, repositioned the lighting, corrected the dessert display, redirected the sound team, rewrote half the guest flow in my head because someone had decided to add a live dance performance near the entrance, without warning me. By 9:30, the first wave of catastrophe arrived. The florist's backup van pulled in. Half the white roses were damaged from heat. Not all. Half. Which is worse. If they had all been ruined, I could have replaced the whole order. Half ruined means you're forced to salvage beauty out of something almost lost. I stood beside the crates, touched a browning petal, and said, "Separate every bloom with any discoloration. Keep the orchids. Keep the tuberose. Mega, call Aurora Gardens. Tell them I'll take every premium ivory rose they have, no negotiation, full payment on delivery. Send Karen with the van now." The florist stared at me. "Ma'am, that'll cost." "Yes. But..." "Yes." He stopped talking. That also was part of the work. When everyone around you panics, certainty becomes its own form of power. By noon, the ballroom was transformed. Not perfect yet, but controlled, structured, beautiful in a way that hid how hard it had fought me. The bride's divorced parents nearly caused another breakdown when they discovered they had been placed at adjacent tables. I fixed that too, not by telling either of them the truth. Truth is rarely the useful tool at expensive family events. Instead, I approached Nina's father and said, "Sir, I was just about to ask if you'd prefer the seat closer to the minister's table. Better visibility, more privacy." He accepted immediately, as men often do when you allow them to mistake a solution for influence. Her mother protested 10 minutes later, and I gave her the mirror version of the same lie. By 1:15, they were 6 tables apart, and each privately convinced I had favored them. By 2 o'clock, a junior coordinator nearly got blamed for a missing vegetarian count, and I saved him by finding the original signed catering brief proving the vendor had underentered the number. By 2:40, one of the electrical crew removed a floor transition strip near the service lane and forgot to replace it. I noticed. I noticed because noticing had always been my gift and my burden. People think being observant is glamorous until they realize it means you also notice every slight, every imbalance, every swallow of anger people expect you to survive quietly. I reported the missing strip immediately. No one fixed it. At 3:10 p.m., a 19-year-old server carrying a tray of mocktails tripped over that exact area and nearly went down with the entire load. The banquet supervisor spun on her. "What is wrong with you?" he snapped. The girl's face drained of blood. "Sir, She's done," he barked. "Send someone else." "No, she isn't," I said. He turned to me, irritated. "Excuse me?" I pointed to the floor. "There's an exposed level change because maintenance removed the transition strip. I flagged it hours ago. She tripped because your team ignored a safety issue." He opened his mouth, closed it, looked down, and saw the evidence right where I said it would be. The girl looked like she might cry. I handed her a napkin. Go wash your hands.
Breathe.
Then come back. The supervisor muttered something about interference. I smiled pleasantly. If you need someone to blame, I can give you the contractor's name. He walked away. The girl whispered, "Thank you, ma'am." Nobody died, I said. Let's keep the standards realistic. She laughed through her panic. And from the far end of the ballroom, a familiar gaze settled on me. I didn't have to turn to know who it was. Vikram had arrived. There are men who enter a room loudly.
Vikram never needed to.
He had that quieter kind of authority, the kind that changed how other people occupied space. Conversations shifted around him. Employees straightened. Managers suddenly remembered unresolved details. Men who enjoyed commanding others lowered their voices near him without realizing they had done it. He was tall, composed, severe in the way expensive discipline often looks severe. But what most people noticed first was not his face or suit or name. It was control. Vikram had always moved like a man trained never to waste motion, emotion, or advantage. When we first met, I mistook that control for stability. Later, I learned that control can be another way of avoiding courage. I saw him only briefly as he crossed the ballroom flanked by 2 executives and a hotel liaison. He was supposed to be in Singapore. We hadn't spoken in 6 weeks. The divorce papers had been prepared, though not signed. The last real conversation we'd had ended with both of us standing in the shell of what used to be our marriage, too proud to admit the grief had outlived the fight. So when our eyes met for just a second across the ballroom, I did the only thing I knew how to do. I looked away first. There was too much work to do for memory. And memory, where Vikram was concerned, had claws. I knew his footsteps anyway. Even after 11 months apart, I would always know them. Not because that is romantic. Because some people become part of your nervous system long before they become part of your history. He stopped near the dessert display.
Riya.
I didn't turn immediately. I finished adjusting a sugar rose on the second-tier platter, then faced him. Mr. Sethi. His expression changed almost invisibly at the formality. You can still say my name. I can also say good afternoon. Which would you prefer? A trace of something, annoyance, amusement, regret, moved through his eyes. Good afternoon, then. Good afternoon. He glanced around the ballroom. You're handling this alone?
No.
I have a team. That wasn't my question. I tucked my tablet under my arm. Then ask a better one. Something almost like the old tension sparked between us. Familiar. Sharp. Alive in a way silence never is. Before he could answer, Megha rushed over. Ma'am, the event accountant needs signature approval on the revised vendor payment. The floral transport surcharge. I held out my hand. Show me. The accountant approached with the urgency of a man who thinks all signatures are equal if the file looks official enough. Ma'am, just here and here, he said. Vendor updated logistics due to delay. I scanned the document automatically. Charge adjustment. Revised invoice. Transfer authorization. New bank account details. My thumb stopped on the line. Something was off. The vendor name remained the same. The bank account holder did not. Not drastically. Just slightly. One extra initial. A small formatting discrepancy. The sort of difference exhausted people miss and careful people survive by catching. When was this revised? I asked. An hour ago. Who confirmed it? The vendor called. From what number? He hesitated. I'd have to check. I looked up. Then check. Ma'am, they're asking for immediate release or delivery liability.
No.
The word came out flat enough to stop him. He frowned. But the event schedule. The event schedule will live, I said. No payment gets processed until the original vendor confirms from the verified contract number and email chain. He still looked annoyed. We may lose time. Then lose time. I handed the file back. Vikram was watching me. I ignored that too. Only later would I learn that the file didn't just involve flowers or transport or event inconvenience. The vendor request routed through a subsidiary servicing one of Vikram's flagship properties. If the fraudulent change had been approved, it would have opened access to a much larger internal system already under audit. In plain language, Someone wasn't just trying to steal from an event. Someone was trying to breach a company. And I had blocked it without knowing any of that. Because something looked wrong. That was all. I didn't know then that Kamini knew more than she should have. I didn't know that Vikram's younger brother Rohit had debts bigger than gossip and deeper than recklessness. I didn't know that what I had stopped that afternoon would eventually expose the lie that had destroyed my marriage. All I knew was that a line on paper felt dishonest. And I had spent too much of my life learning what dishonesty looks like when it's dressed well. By early evening, the guests arrived in waves of perfume, influence, and curated affection. Luxury families never merely attend events. They arrive like narratives. The men discussed investments before the starters. The women complimented each other's jewelry with surgical precision. Old rivalries floated beneath warm greetings. People air-kissed while calculating hierarchy. Smiles glittered. Secrets sweated beneath silk. The ballroom glowed. A string quartet played near the mirrored wall. The floral arch looked stunning. The candles softened every angle. If you had entered then, you would have believed the evening had always been meant to look this seamless. That's what I mean when I say competence is a strange kind of invisibility. When you do it perfectly, your struggle disappears first. I spent most of the next 2 hours in motion. Checking timing, quieting nerves, reassigning a table after a guest arrived with an unlisted +1, sending water to the makeup artist who looked faint, moving a vase 6 inches because cameras are more unforgiving than people. At one point, an elderly aunt felt dizzy just before the ring ceremony. Half the family began panicking and arguing over whether to call an ambulance. I found the family physician among the guests, got juice, cleared space, and sent curious onlookers away before the bride noticed anything was wrong. At another point, 2 men in tailored suits were loudly blaming one of the junior servers for a champagne shortage that turned out to be their own driver unloading the wrong crate at the wrong entrance. I fixed that too. And throughout it all, I became dimly aware that Vikram kept noticing. He never hovered. That would not have been him. But every time something went wrong, I could feel his attention turn. Maybe because he was finally seeing what everyone else took for granted. Maybe because distance had made me visible to him in ways marriage had not. Or maybe because guilt sharpens observation. Near the end of the ceremony, as guests flowed toward dinner, I found myself beside him again near the side corridor. He looked at me for a moment, then said, "You haven't eaten." I almost laughed. "That's what you noticed? It's one of the things. Congratulations. Your observational skills are improving." His eyes moved briefly to my wrist, where I had pressed 2 fingers against the pulse of a stress headache without realizing it. "You're exhausted. I'm working." Those are not synonyms. For women in this industry, they often are. He had no answer to that. I walked away before the silence could become something softer than I was prepared to survive. Dinner began at 8:10. At 8:22, Dadi Shanti called me over. At 8:23, I sat down. At 8:24, Kamini reminded me exactly where she believed I belonged. And at 8:25, her son moved his chair. The problem with public humiliation is that it doesn't end when the words do. It hangs in the air afterward, searching for witnesses. When Kamini told me to move to the staff table, everyone at that end of the ballroom heard enough to understand the message. Maybe not every word. Enough. And the reason wealthy cruelty can be so effective is because it arrives disguised as etiquette. Kamini did not scream. She did not call me names. She did not say I was unworthy. She simply invoked rules, boundaries, proper placement, the kind of language toxic families use when they want to make exclusion sound civilized. "Riya," she had said, smiling. "I'm sure you understand." Yes, I understood perfectly. I understood that she had never forgiven me for marrying her son without the pedigree she preferred. I understood that no matter how elegantly I managed their events or how quietly I carried their family's messes, I would always be measured against daughters-in-law who came from older money, better surnames, lighter gossip. I understood that in her world, usefulness could be tolerated, but equality could not. And most painfully, I understood how familiar that feeling still was. Because Kamini hadn't only humiliated me at events. She had done it during my marriage too. Not always directly. Never where it could be called abuse. A comment here. A correction there. A tradition used as a leash. A family expectation placed on my back and called grace. The first year of my marriage, she had once rearranged the kitchen after I cooked dinner for 20 guests and said, smiling, "In our family, we serve from the right." I know girls from smaller homes may not learn these details. The second year, she had introduced me at a fundraiser as Riya, who keeps busy with little decoration work, as if the company I had built from nothing was a hobby involving ribbons. The third year, when funds went missing from a Sethi charity gala and suspicion circled me like flies, Kamini never accused me outright. She simply said, in front of the right people, "I always told Vikram that mixing family with outside influences can become complicated." Outside influences, meaning me. She always preferred elegant poison. So when she asked me to leave the family table that night, it wasn't a new insult. It was the oldest one wearing a new dress. That was why I stood up so calmly. I had long ago stopped expecting dignity from Kamini Sethi. What I had not expected was Vikram. He didn't look furious when he moved the chair. He looked certain. And that was more unsettling, because Vikram at his coldest could be hard. Vikram at his angriest could be ruthless. But Vikram, when he became certain about something, that was when entire rooms rearranged themselves around his will. When he sat beside me and said, "If Riya doesn't belong here, neither do I," the meaning was bigger than the sentence. What he was really saying was, if you insult her, you insult me. If you reduce her, you expose yourself. If you want hierarchy, you can build it without my cooperation. Kamini's mouth tightened. "This is unnecessary," she said under her breath. "No," Vikram replied. "It's overdue." That was the first time all evening I truly looked at him. And I realized something had changed. He knew something. I saw it in the way he glanced at me. Not pitying, not performative, but almost struck. As if the woman he thought he knew had shifted shape in front of him. Dinner at the head table fractured after that. No one knew how to behave. A businessman cleared his throat too loudly. Nina stared at her plate. One of Kamini's friends attempted a new topic and failed. Dottie Shanti looked like she wanted to laugh into her soup. I could have stayed there. That would have been the triumphant thing, perhaps. But I was too tired for symbolic victories and too aware of my team still working in the back. So after a few minutes, I stood. "I need to check dessert timing," I said. Kamini looked relieved. Vikram rose too. "I'll come." I turned to him sharply. "Why?" He gave the smallest tilt of his head toward the ballroom. "Because if I stay, my mother will say something she'll regret in front of people whose opinions she unfortunately values." Dottie Shawnee muttered, "That ship sailed years ago." I nearly smiled. Vikram followed me across the ballroom, not touching me, not crowding me, just staying close enough for everyone to notice. By the time we reached the service corridor, half the room had already converted the scene into gossip. That was the thing about high society. Truth takes weeks. A glance takes seconds. The staff dining corner near the service entrance was quieter than the ballroom, though not quiet enough to hide from reality. Servers stood while eating between tasks. My interns compared checklists with mouths full of rushed bites. One assistant was sitting on an upside-down crate because all the folding chairs were in use. This was the real skeleton of luxury. People with sore feet making rich evenings look effortless. I checked the dessert sequence with the pastry lead, approved the extra plates for the delayed VIP table, and finally allowed Megha to physically push a plate toward me. "If you faint," she said, "I am not coordinating your dramatic collapse." Supportive as ever. "I'm serious." I picked up the fork, though I had barely taken a bite when Vikram appeared again. My assistant nearly inhaled her own tea. He ignored that and looked at me. "You left the head table." "I have work." "You always have work." "Yes," I said. "Some of us do." He accepted the hit without flinching. Then he glanced around at the cramped setup, at the interns, the paper plates, the staff who had gone stiff simply because he had entered their space. Without a word, he pulled a chair from the side wall and sat down. At the staff table. Among my people. The reaction was immediate and almost comic. A lighting technician stopped chewing. One of the servers looked terrified to breathe too loudly. Mega stared at me like I had summoned a monsoon in formal wear. I leaned toward Vikram. What are you doing?
Eating.
At my staff table? You seem to imply I belong where you do. That is not what I said. It's what I heard. I almost told him to leave. Almost. But before I could, one of the coordinators rushed in with a file. Ma'am, the accountant confirmed the vendor's official number. They say that revised payment request is fake. I turned. What? She handed me the phone. On speaker, the original vendor sounded panicked. Madam, we never changed the account. Someone sent false paperwork from a copied email ID. For a second, the room narrowed. Freeze every related invoice, I said. No payments. Flag it to venue legal and internal accounts immediately. I hung up and looked at the file. Vikram held out his hand. Let me see. I hesitated, then passed it over. He scanned faster than I did. His face hardened. This doesn't stop at the event, he said quietly. What do you mean? He looked up. This banking chain is tied to a subsidiary account under one of our properties. Mega looked between us, lost. I said, how bad? Vikram's jaw tightened. Potentially very. Then came the line that changed everything. He looked at me, not as the woman he had separated from, not as the daughter-in-law his mother could never accept, not even as the planner managing his sister's event. He looked at me as if he had just discovered something profound and humiliating about himself. You caught this while fixing everything else? I frowned. Yes. And you had no idea it affected one of my companies?
No.
Then why did you stop it? I stared at him, suddenly exhausted by the question. Because it was wrong. Something passed through his face then. Not admiration alone. Recognition. The kind that hurts. Because I think that was the moment Vikram understood that while he had spent the last year trapped inside pride, silence, and family damage, I had never stopped being exactly who I always was. The one who notices. The one who protects. The one who refuses to look away just because something ugly is inconvenient. And that truth must have cut him deeply. Because once, when it mattered most, he had looked away from me. The event ended just after midnight. By then, the ring ceremony videos were already circulating on social media, guests were calling it exquisite, and half the family had begun congratulating themselves for an evening they had nearly ruined before breakfast. I stayed until the final vendor sign-off, checked transport clearance, settled staff tips, made sure the extra desserts went to the night crew instead of being thrown out. At 12:47 a.m., I finally stepped into the parking area behind the venue with my heels in my hand and my dignity held together by muscle memory. The night air felt colder than it should have. I leaned against my car for a second and closed my eyes.
Riya.
Of course. I didn't turn right away. I really am too tired for one last emotionally complicated conversation, I said. Then I'll make it simple. I faced him. He had removed his jacket. His tie was loosened. For the first time all night, he looked less like the controlled heir to a luxury empire and more like a man whose certainty had been disturbed. What? I asked. He paused, which already told me this mattered. I was wrong about you, he said. I let out a short, humorless breath. That is not exactly new information.
No, he said.
I mean, tonight reminded me how wrong. The parking lot lights cast hard shadows under his eyes. He looked tired too. Good, I thought bitterly. Let him be tired. He continued. You saw something everyone else missed. You prevented a serious breach. You handled my family all day with more grace than they deserved. And when my mother insulted you, you didn't ask anyone to defend your worth. I said nothing. You already knew it. That hurt more than I expected. Because praise from the person who failed to protect you comes laced with grief. I looked away first. Good night, Vikram. He stepped closer, but not too close. I should have defended you before. There it was. The real wound. Not tonight.
Before.
At the fundraiser. In the house. In all the small moments his family cut pieces off me and called it adjustment. I finally met his eyes.
Yes.
You should have. He nodded once, like a man accepting a sentence already earned. I know. Then, he did something I had never seen him do well. He stopped talking before the apology turned into self-defense. I got into my car. He didn't try to stop me. But when I drove home that night, exhausted beyond thought, I kept seeing one thing. A man carrying a chair across a ballroom because his mother had tried to tell me where I belonged. At the time, I didn't know that moment would become the fracture line between the old version of Vikram and the one who would slowly begin trying to deserve another chance. I also didn't know how expensive truth was about to become, because the next part of the story wasn't romance. It was betrayal. The kind buried inside family. The kind that smiles over dinner. The kind that can destroy a marriage long before anyone calls it broken. The first time Vikram showed up at one of my events after Naina's engagement, I assumed he had business there. The second time, I became suspicious. The third time, I was offended by how unconvincing his excuses had become. The official reason was always something respectable. Budget oversight, guest flow review, hospitality standards, brand alignment. Apparently, the chairman's son had suddenly developed a passionate professional concern for chair sashes, floral timing, and canopy placement. I was coordinating a luxury hotel anniversary gala at one of the Sethi properties when I first decided to punish him for it. He arrived halfway through setup, glanced at the stage, and asked with a straight face, "Why, ivory linen instead of champagne?" I stared at him. "Because," I said, "the client asked for ivory." He nodded as if I had just briefed him on an acquisition. "And the place cards? What about them? Have they been arranged?" I handed him the full box. "Alphabetize these." He blinked. I folded my arms. "You're here for operational interest, aren't you?" Megha nearly choked on her tea. Vikram took the box. The room held its breath. Then, to everyone's astonishment, including mine, he set the box on a nearby table and began sorting the cards. A hotel manager passing by slowed down, then kept walking faster, like he had just seen a tiger politely doing admin work. 20 minutes later, I came back to check. "You put the khanas before the Quranas." He looked down. "No, I didn't." "You did." He adjusted them. No argument. No ego. Just correction. "Better," I said. A muscle in his jaw twitched, but he said nothing. That became our strange, new language. He would appear where he didn't strictly need to be. I would hand him something absurdly ordinary. Ribbon sorting, name tags, seating revisions, menu proofing, vendor confirmation sheets. And he would do them. My staff stopped fearing him after the fourth event. Then they became entertained by him. Eventually, they began trusting him in cautious increments. He remembered names. He thanked servers without performing generosity. He never humiliated junior staff in public. And he had an odd talent for standing silently in the exact place where difficult men suddenly reconsidered being rude to women working around them. I noticed that last part more than I wanted to. There was one evening during a high-profile rehearsal dinner when a drunk family friend kept trying to corner one of my young coordinators with harmless jokes. I intervened before it escalated, but when I turned, the man had already gone pale. Vikram was behind him. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't threatened him, hadn't needed to. The man excused himself and vanished for the rest of the night. "Thank you," my coordinator whispered once he was gone. I only nodded. But later, as I watched Vikram speaking with the venue manager near the back corridor, I felt something old and dangerous stir beneath my caution. Not trust. Not yet. Something more complicated. The memory of trust. And that can be worse. The more time passed, the more I began noticing details I had once dismissed. He still didn't explain himself unless necessary. Still hated emotional mess. Still defaulted to control when uncertain. But there were changes too. He listened longer. Interrupted less. When I disagreed with him, he no longer treated disagreement as disloyalty. That was new. Once, during a late planning meeting, a senior executive tried to overrule my staffing plan because he thought fewer women would look more efficient during a luxury VIP sequence. I told him calmly that if he wanted efficiency, He could begin by not confusing masculinity with competence. The room froze. In the past, Vikram might have tried to smooth it over. This time, he said, Ms. Bellamy's staffing plan remains. The executive glanced at him. I was only suggesting. I know, Vikram said. Don't. Simple.
Flat.
Final. After the meeting, as we walked out together, I said, You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did.
Why?
He looked ahead. Because he was wrong. Something twisted in my chest. That had once been my own answer to him. Because it was wrong. Maybe that's how people change. Not all at once. By slowly learning to borrow the moral language of the person they hurt until it becomes their own. A week later, I met Arjun Malhotra. He was not a threat exactly. He was a complication. Arjun was a media consultant for one of the luxury brands hosting a launch event I was planning. Attractive in an easy, sunlit way. Charming without trying too hard. The kind of man who made women laugh because he genuinely noticed when they were tired and offered coffee without attaching ego to the gesture. He flirted openly. And unlike Vikram, he didn't hide interest behind discussions about linen quality. Dinner, he asked one evening after a venue walkthrough. That was subtle, I said. I'm told time is valuable. It is. So save mine and say yes. I almost did. Not because I loved him, because he felt uncomplicated. And women recovering from pain are often most tempted by what looks emotionally inexpensive. I became aware of Vikram before I saw him. Then he was suddenly beside us. Arjun, he said. Vikram. The temperature around that interaction could have chilled metal. Vikram turned to me. Have the emergency routes been confirmed? Yes. The external lighting? Yes. The valet expansion? Yes. Arjun looked amused. I was nearly amused too. Anything else? I asked sweetly. Vikram's eyes flicked briefly toward Arjun.
No.
Good, I said, then turned back. Dinner sounds nice. Arjun smiled. Vikram's face remained controlled, but I knew that jawline. Knew that stillness. That particular version of quiet. Jealousy looked very elegant on him. And from that day on, I did something slightly cruel. I let him pretend. If Arjun brought me coffee, Vikram appeared 5 minutes later with questions about scheduling. If Arjun stayed too long after a briefing, Vikram suddenly had thoughts about guest security. If Arjun made me laugh, Vikram materialized like a formal-wear ghost with an urgent concern about vendor logistics. I never accused him. That would have made things easier for both of us. Instead, I handed him tasks. Since you're here, I'd say, hold this. Or, these favors need ribbon. Or, count these welcome kits. He always did it. Once, Arjun watched him tie 200 ribbon bows with the concentration of a man diffusing explosives and said to me quietly, I think your ex-husband is trying very hard not to admit something. What makes you think that? He glanced at Vikram. Because no man with that much money voluntarily ties ribbons unless love or guilt has seriously damaged his judgment. I almost laughed out loud. The dangerous thing was I no longer knew which one it was. Maybe both. Still, no matter how often Vikram appeared, no matter how much softer some things became, one wound never truly left us. The missing funds. The charity gala. The scandal that ended our marriage. A year earlier, during one of the Sethi Foundation's annual fundraisers, an accounting discrepancy had been discovered after the event. Not a small mistake. A serious one. Money had been redirected through a temporary transfer chain tied to event disbursements. My disbursements. I hadn't authorized it. I hadn't seen it. But the paperwork crossed through my operational table, and that was enough for suspicion to attach itself to me like oil. Nobody openly accused me of theft. That would have been legally inconvenient. Instead, they did something worse. They allowed doubt. Kamini looked hurt. Naina looked embarrassed. Rohit avoided eye contact. Several relatives suddenly became distant, gracious in the way people are when they have already decided they are above contamination. And Vikram asked me questions that were fair on paper and devastating in reality. Did you approve any late transfers?
No.
Did you delegate final release?
No.
Then how did this happen? I don't know. That was the truth. And sometimes truth sounds weakest exactly when it matters most. He never called me a liar. He never said he believed I stole anything. But he also never stood in front of his family and said, "I trust my wife." That absence became the real accusation. I moved out 3 weeks later. People assume marriages end in one explosion. Many don't. Some end in slow oxygen loss. I packed a suitcase while Vikram stood near the window and said, "If you leave like this, people will think." I turned on him then, tears burning, because I had swallowed too many already. "People already think," I said. "And you let them." That sentence stayed between us long after I walked away. So yes, when he started showing up to my events again, when he listened more, defended better, watched me with growing respect, part of me noticed. Part of me even responded. But another part remembered exactly what silence had cost me. That part refused to be charmed by improvement alone. And then came the contract that changed everything. It was called the Ahuja Singhania wedding. If you work in high-end event planning, you learn to recognize life-changing contracts before the formal offer is even printed. This was one of those. 2 politically connected families. 3 days of functions. Outdoor ceremonies. International guests. Security coordination. Media sensitivities. For separate aesthetic themes. Nearly unlimited budget, so long as every detail justified its own luxury. Winning that contract wouldn't just bring money. It would change perception. It would move Bellamy Events from respected boutique firm to undeniable top-tier name. I spent 3 days building the proposal. Every sheet precise. Every concept layered. Every staffing, lighting, hospitality, and contingency plan mapped as if I were designing a military campaign disguised as celebration. When I presented it, the family seemed impressed. When they called me back, I believed I had won.
I had.
Until they closed the conference room door. The bride's father clasped his hands on the table and said, "There is one concern." I already disliked him for the sentence. The bride's mother smiled with the nervous politeness of a woman about to say something ugly she intends to call practical. "It's your personal situation," she said gently. "My personal situation?" The father shifted. "Your visibility with the Sethi family. With Vikram in particular." Everything in me went still. "There has been gossip," the mother added quickly. "You understand how society can be."
Yes.
I understood. Society is often just cowardice in formal clothing. The father continued, "We are hosting a very traditional wedding. We prefer that vendors involved in the celebration not attract avoidable commentary." Vendors. There it was. A single word doing the work of degradation. "What exactly are you asking?" I said. The mother inhaled. "During the engagement period and through the wedding, we would prefer that you not be seen socially with your husband, or involved in visible association with that family." I looked at the contract in front of me. The amount was more money than Bellamy Events had ever been offered at once. This contract could hire permanent staff, secure a larger office, absorb seasonal shocks, and give my team stability I had spent years fighting to build. All I had to do was agree to one condition: disappear. Disavow association. Act ashamed of the one man whose attention had become socially inconvenient for them. And maybe some women would have accepted. Maybe they would have called it strategy. Maybe they would have told themselves dignity can return later once financial safety is secure. But I knew something by then. Every compromise made under insult remains visible in the soul long after the money is spent. So I closed the file. "No." The mother blinked. "Perhaps you should take time to consider." "I don't need time." "You're throwing away an extraordinary opportunity." "Yes." The father's tone cooled. "For pride?" I looked directly at him. "No," I said. "For self-respect. Pride wants to win. Self-respect knows what not to accept." Then I stood and walked out before they could reshape cruelty into concern. I made it all the way to the parking lot before I cried. Not inside. Not where anyone could see. In my car. Hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, I thought my fingers might lock. I cried because I was angry. Because I was tired. Because building something on your own terms is beautiful until those terms cost you the thing you've worked hardest to earn. And because part of me hated that the world still found ways to tell women like me the same story, over and over. You may create beauty for powerful people. You may save their events. You may carry their chaos. But don't become too visible. Don't become too equal. Don't make them explain why someone like you stands beside someone like him. I told my team the contract had fallen through due to alignment issues. They looked disappointed, but not surprised. That was the saddest part. Women in service-based professions learn early that talent is admired right up until it threatens social comfort. I did not tell Vikram. Not because I wanted to protect him. Because I wanted at least one victory, one loss, to remain mine. But secrets in toxic families rarely stay buried where they should. Sometimes the people most invested in your humiliation dig them up themselves. Kamini did exactly that. The charity dinner was one of those polished social evenings where nobody says anything honest until the third drink. The ballroom glimmered with donor money and strategic generosity. Political names floated around tables. Men shook hands as though shaking history. Women discussed philanthropy like a competitive sport. I was there because Bellamy Events had coordinated the decor and floor logistics. Vikram was there because the Sethi Foundation sat on the donor board. Kamini was there because public virtue is where women like her wear their most expensive masks. I was speaking with a floral sponsor near the side aisle when Kamini approached our table, set down her glass, and smiled. "What a pity about the Ahuja Singhania wedding," she said. The sentence was light enough to pass as conversation. Vikram looked up immediately. I felt it before I processed it, the dangerous turn in the room. "What about it?" he asked. Kamini dabbed the corner of her mouth with a napkin. Only that Riya lost it over something so avoidable. I stared at her. She knew. Of course she knew. People like Kamini always know which injuries to press. Vikram's eyes moved to me. What does she mean? It's nothing. Kamini smiled more brightly. They asked her not to be seen with you. Imagine. And she refused. Silence fell across the table. The donor seated beside us suddenly found the ceiling fascinating. Vikram turned fully toward me now, all trace of social politeness gone. They said what? It's handled, I said quietly. No, he said, even quieter. How much was the contract? Vikram. How much? I knew that tone. I knew what was coming. The instinct to solve. To replace. To compensate. To erase pain with power before it is time to become memory. He was already reaching for his phone. I covered his hand with mine.
No.
He looked at me, stunned. I can replace that contract tonight. I know. I can bring you 10 more. I know. Then why are you stopping me? Because this mattered in a way money never could. Because if he fixed it too quickly, then my refusal would become another beautiful story about how a powerful man rescued a woman from consequence. And I had not bled for my dignity just to let that happen. I didn't turn down their money, I said, so I could take yours.
He stared at me.
I kept going, because sometimes truth must be spoken before courage disappears. If I accept your rescue now, then my choice stops being mine. It becomes another thing your name covered. Another thing your power paid for. He was very still. Around us, even Kamini seemed to understand this was no longer entertainment. I lowered my hands slowly. I made a decision. It cost me something. Let it cost me something. That was the hardest thing for a man like Vikram to hear. He could tolerate insult. He could confront enemies. He could buy time, access, comfort, leverage. But helpless respect? That required a different kind of strength. He looked at me for a long moment. Then slowly, he put the phone back on the table. Kamini's satisfaction evaporated instantly. Because I had just refused the thing she assumed every woman wanted from a man like her son. And Vikram had done the unthinkable. He had listened. Not argued. Not overruled. Listened. The rest of that dinner passed in a haze of polite conversation and internal aftershocks. But 3 days later, something happened the Ahuja Singhania family clearly did not expect. They called me back. The full contract was restored. The fee had increased. And every condition had disappeared. Officially, no one admitted why. Unofficially, People with too much money and too many contacts had realized it was strategically foolish to insult the woman now increasingly associated with Vikram Sethi's visible respect. He hadn't threatened them. He didn't need to. Powerful families often punish themselves preemptively when they suspect they have offended power nearby. The bride's mother sounded almost relieved on the call. "We hope you'll reconsider." "I will," I said, "on one condition." A long pause. "What condition?" "You'll come to my office and apologize." "To you?"
No.
I looked through the glass wall of my conference room at my team, the assistants who stayed late, the coordinators who got blamed first, the women who made impossible events look graceful while being treated like moving furniture by people who wore entitlement like jewelry. To my staff. Silence. Then a strained, "I beg your pardon?" "You suggested that someone like me could make your wedding look common," I said. "What you meant was that people who work for families like yours are acceptable only while invisible. If you want Bellamy events, you will apologize to the people who make luxury possible." They came. Monday morning. In person. The bride's parents stood in my office before my full team and delivered an apology that was uncomfortable, carefully worded, but undeniably real. I did not humiliate them. That would have made it about revenge. I made it about witness. My staff heard every word. When the meeting ended, one of my youngest coordinators cried in the restroom. Not because she was sad. Because no one had ever demanded respect for her in a room full of people who thought she should be grateful for employment alone. That afternoon, when Vikram heard what I had done, he came to my office and stood in the doorway like a man who had just discovered a language he wanted to spend the rest of his life learning. "You made them apologize to your team. They insulted my team. You could have made it about yourself." I looked up from my laptop. "It was never only about me." He said nothing for a moment. Then, very quietly, "That's what I keep learning." I should have guarded myself better then.
I know that now.
Because admiration can be dangerous when it comes from the person who once held your trust and dropped it. But then came the twist neither of us had seen clearly enough. The fraud I stopped at Nina's engagement wasn't an isolated crime. It was a trail. And it led straight back to the wound that had destroyed us. The first sign came from Samar, one of Vikram's internal audit leads. He requested a meeting under formal pretense and arrived with the face of a man who hated the contents of his own file. I was at the office late, finalizing floral revisions, when Mega buzzed my cabin. "There's someone here from Sethi Group. He says it's urgent." I assumed another property emergency. It wasn't. Samar entered, set down a sealed envelope, and said, "Mr. Sethi asked me to deliver this personally." "Why?" His answer was careful. "Because what's inside concerns you." A cold line moved down my spine. I opened the envelope. Bank routing chains. Transfer flags. Audit comparisons. Cross-reference signatures. And then I saw it. The old charity gala ledger. The one from a year ago. My vision narrowed. "No," I whispered. Samar said nothing. I flipped pages. The same temporary transfer pattern. The same style of banking redirection. The same layered approval masking. Different event. Different disguise. Same architecture. The forged floral payment I stopped at Nina's engagement matched the structural footprint of the earlier financial discrepancy, the one that had fallen on me. I sat back slowly. Who found this? Mr. Sethi ordered a full forensic comparison after the engagement incident. My throat tightened. And Samar hesitated. That hesitation told me everything before he spoke. The previous charity gala discrepancy did not originate from your side. I looked at him. It was internally buried. The office around me seemed to go silent in a strange, echoing way. Buried by whom? He exhaled. There is evidence pointing to financial intervention authorized informally through Rohit Sethi's private debt channels. For a moment, I genuinely did not understand the sentence. My mind heard the words but refused the shape. Rohit, Vikram's younger brother. Charming when sober. Volatile when drunk. Reckless with money. Reckless with women. Reckless with everyone else's consequences. He had gambling habits the family described as impulsive financial behavior, which is wealthy language for self-destruction subsidized by relatives. I stared at the file. And the family knew? Samar chose his next words with legal caution. There are indicators that Mrs. Sethi was aware of discrepancies earlier than formally acknowledged. My hand tightened over the papers. Kamini knew. My mother-in-law knew. She knew the money trail that ruined me was not mine. She knew suspicion should have fallen on her own son. And she let me carry it instead.
No. Worse.
She arranged for me to carry it. Because daughters-in-law can be sacrificed. Sons cannot. The realization didn't arrive like thunder. It arrived like ice. Sharp. Precise. Deadly in its quietness. I remembered every moment from that year with horrifying clarity. Kamini's wounded expressions. Rohit's forced concern. The whispers among relatives. Vikram asking careful questions instead of taking my hand and saying he trusted me. All of it rearranged itself at once. I was not collateral damage. I was chosen damage. Easier to doubt. Easier to remove. Easier to blame than the son they wanted protected. I don't remember Samar leaving. I remember only sitting alone in my office, the documents open before me, tears coming without noise. Not from confusion. From confirmation. There is a specific agony in being proven innocent after you have already survived punishment. Because justice arrives too late to prevent the wound, and truth cannot return the version of you that went through it blindly. An hour later, Vikram came. He entered without announcing himself, stopped at my desk, and looked at the papers spread before me. I did not stand. I did not greet him. I only asked, "How long have you known?" "Since this afternoon," he said. I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. "Congratulations. You solved the puzzle." His face tightened. "Riya." "No," I looked up at him. "Did you know enough to doubt them before now?"
No.
"Did you ever truly believe me back then?" He inhaled sharply, the question hitting exactly where I meant it to. "I believed you weren't capable of stealing." "That is not the same thing." "I know." "No," I said, standing now because pain finally needed movement. "You believed I was probably innocent, but still possibly responsible. And you let that uncertainty sit on my chest until I left." His voice dropped. "I know. I hated how sincere it sounded. I stood in your house," I said, my throat burning, "and watched your family look at me like I had contaminated them. Your mother all but buried me alive in respectable suspicion. Your brother avoided me. Your sister whispered. And you, the one person who should have stood in front of all of them, you asked me for explanations like I was an employee under review." His eyes shut for 1 second. When they opened, the regret in them was so naked it nearly made me turn away. "I failed you," he said. "Yes." There was no relief in saying it. Only truth. He took a step closer. "There is no excuse."
No.
"I should have chosen you." "Yes." His jaw flexed. "I thought restraint made me fair." I swallowed hard. "Restraint made you a coward." The word landed. He didn't defend himself. That was the only reason I kept listening. He looked down at the file, then back at me. "Tell me what you want me to do." That almost undid me. Because once, Vikram would have decided what needed to be done, and called it protection. Now he was asking. I wiped my face angrily. "This time, you do not save me.
You do not manage me. You do not speak over me.
If this comes out, you stand beside me, not in front." His answer came instantly. Yes. That was when I realized he had changed enough to be dangerous again. Because a man who learns humility after guilt can become far more compelling than the arrogant version you already escaped. And I was not ready for how much part of me still wanted him. The confrontation did not happen in private. That would have been too merciful. Families like the Sethis do most of their damage in refined public spaces. It felt appropriate that truth should meet them there too. The occasion was the Sethi Foundation Anniversary Gala, the same annual charity event whose accounting scandal had once helped destroy me. The hall was full. Media, donors, business partners, political guests, socialites, women who built empires out of invitations, men who mistook sponsorship for virtue. Kamini moved through that room like a queen restored to her preferred stage. Emerald silk again, diamonds at her ears, Smiles for photographers. Blessings for donors. Graceful touches on elbows. That familiar illusion of warmth that masked a will sharp enough to wound quietly. Rohit was there too. He looked relaxed. Too relaxed. That is the arrogance of people protected for too long. Naina floated between guests pretending harmony still existed if she ignored enough tension. And Vikram. Vikram was different that night. Quieter. Not colder. Resolved. I felt it from the moment he entered. He found me near the side corridor 15 minutes before the main speech sequence. Everything's ready, I said automatically. I'm not asking about the event. I looked at him. Are you sure? He asked. No qualifiers. No pressure. Not, are you emotionally okay? Not, have you thought about the consequences? Just, are you sure? Yes. He nodded. That's all I needed. At 9:20 p.m., Kamini took the stage. She began the way women like her always begin, with legacy, family service, philanthropic values, community vision, generations of responsibility. The crowd applauded. Then Vikram stood. He didn't ask for the microphone. He took it. The room went quiet with the instinctive recognition people have when power interrupts itself. Kamini turned, still smiling at first. Vikram, she said lightly. He faced the audience. For years, he said, this foundation has spoken publicly about integrity. No one moved. I could hear my own heartbeat. There is something that must be corrected before we speak of integrity again. Kamini's smile thinned. This is not the moment. He turned his head slightly toward her. It is exactly the moment. The room sharpened. Cameras lifted. Rohit shifted in his chair. Vikram continued, voice steady, not raised. A year ago, a financial discrepancy during this foundation's gala was quietly allowed to implicate my wife. A visible ripple ran through the guests. She was not responsible. The words struck like glass breaking. Recent forensic review confirms that the transfer structure came through concealed debt routing connected to my brother, Rohit Sethi. Rohit stood so abruptly his chair crashed behind him. What the hell are you doing? He snapped. Vikram turned toward him with a calm so lethal the room recoiled from it. Something that should have been done a year ago. Kamini moved forward. Enough, Vikram. This can be handled privately. He looked at her then, and for the first time in public, I saw no softness in him where she was concerned.
No.
Privately is where you buried it. A collective breath moved through the hall. Kamini's composure cracked. Watch your tone.
No, he said.
Watch your choices. Then, he did the thing I didn't expect. He exposed himself first. I failed my wife, he said to the room. Because when she needed trust, I offered procedure. When she needed loyalty, I offered caution. I let suspicion breathe in my house because I mistook silence for fairness. Every face turned toward me. I stood still. Not shrinking. Not rescued.
Seen.
Vikram held up the documents. These records show the missing funds were redirected to conceal Rohit Sethi's debts. My mother knew more than she admitted. And the woman blamed for the damage was innocent. Whispers exploded. Rohit lunged forward. You self-righteous bastard. Two men in dark suits stepped in from the rear entrance before he reached the stage. Financial Crimes Division. The crowd gasped. Kamini actually staggered. She turned to Vikram, horrified. You involved authorities? His expression did not change.
No.
Your choices did. That was the moment I moved. I walked to the stage, took the microphone from his hand, and faced the family that had tried to survive by placing shame on my back. For 1 second, the entire room held its breath. Then I spoke. For a year, I said, I was looked at like I had polluted this family with carelessness, embarrassment, and dishonor. My voice did not shake. That surprised even me. I was asked indirect questions, given direct distance, corrected, watched, quietly excluded, and left to carry suspicion I did not deserve. Kamini whispered sharply, Riya, enough. I looked straight at her.
No.
You've had enough of being protected by silence. The room was so quiet I could hear a glass set down somewhere in the back. You called me family when service was needed, I said. You called me staff when dignity was inconvenient. You used refinement to disguise cruelty and tradition to excuse cowardice. Kamini's lips trembled. I was protecting my son, and destroying me was easier.
She could not answer that.
So, I finished it for her. I was never unfit for this family, I said. This family was unfit for me. No one clapped. This wasn't cinema. It was better. They listened. The kind of silence that never forgets. Rohit was escorted out in full view of donors, trustees, and the same social circle he had spent years charming. Naina burst into tears, not noble tears, not tragic ones, but the ugly, helpless tears of someone realizing denial is no longer an available luxury. Kamini stood alone under the stage lights, stripped not of wealth or clothes or title, but of narrative. And for women like her, that is annihilation. Because she had spent decades curating how rooms interpreted her. Now the room had facts. That was karma. Not loud. Not theatrical.
Precise. Public.
Final. After the gala, the city fed on the story for weeks. Not every detail reached the newspapers. Powerful families are experts at containing explicit scandal. But enough spread. Enough for people to understand the shape of what had happened. Enough for doors to close for Rohit. Enough for invitations to stop arriving for Kamini. Enough for donors to quietly step back from anything carrying too much Sethi family smoke. Naina left for London within 2 months under the pretense of specialized design studies, which is what privileged families call emotional escape when flights are expensive enough. The Sethi Foundation restructured. Publicly, the messaging emphasized accountability reforms. Privately, it meant the empire had begun amputating infection. As for Bellamy events, we grew.
Fast.
The Ahuja Singhania wedding became a triumph. Then came referrals. Then came people who specifically requested us because they had heard, accurately, that I did not bend easily under social pressure. Some clients called me difficult. Better clients called me exact. I hired more coordinators. Moved into a larger office with natural light and enough storage that boxes no longer lived under desks. I gave Megha the title she had deserved for years, and the salary too. I started a staff dignity protocol for all major events, meal schedules, harassment escalation, safe transport, contractual protection language. Because surviving humiliation teaches you where systems fail, and healing sometimes looks like paperwork. Vikram watched all of it. And to his credit, he did not try to own any piece of the success. He never offered to invest. Never suggested expansion funding. Never quietly paid off a lease. Never helped in the ways men with money often use to turn admiration into leverage. Later, I found out he had considered all of those things. He told me once, with an expression halfway between sheepish and serious, "You would have murdered me professionally. I would have assigned you 800 wedding favor boxes. You've said that like it isn't murder." It became easier to laugh with him after truth. Not because the pain vanished. Because lies were no longer sitting between us pretending to be furniture. But love after betrayal is not a staircase. It's weather. Some days I missed him. Some days I remembered too sharply who he had been when I needed him most. Some days I almost reached for him. Some days I wanted him very far away so I could hear my own healing clearly. And he allowed all of it. That mattered more than flowers would have. More than speeches. More than regret. He waited. Not passively. Patiently. There is a difference. When I needed space, he gave it. When I asked for help, he came. When I invited him to an event, he attended without making it about himself. When I didn't invite him, he did not appear with business oversight and a convenient lie. That too was growth. Months later, at another high-profile wedding my company ran, he arrived unexpectedly anyway, but for a reason so ridiculous I almost forgave him on the spot. The wedding had 250 guests, 1 minister, 3 high-maintenance aunties, a flower girl with criminal energy, and a groom's uncle who believed microphones existed specifically for him. I was near the service entrance with a headset in one ear, solving a seating glitch and a dessert delay simultaneously when a junior coordinator hurried toward me looking terrified. "Ma'am."
No.
"You don't even know what I'm." Yes, I do. She lowered her voice. Mr. Sethi is here. I closed my eyes. Of course he was. Does he have a seat? She asked. That question caused more panic than actual emergencies usually do. Within seconds, the venue manager appeared. We can rearrange table 3.
No, I said.
Or add beside the head table.
No.
There's a private lounge upstairs. He came to a wedding, not witness protection. The manager blinked. I turned and saw him across the ballroom. Vikram stood near the entrance, perfectly composed, hands loosely at his sides, looking completely unbothered by the social chaos his existence created. I walked over. You weren't invited. Hello to you too. You don't have a seat. I've survived worse. Why are you here? He held my gaze for one beat too long. Business oversight. I stared. This isn't one of your hotels.
No.
You have no stake in this wedding.
No.
So, what exactly are you overseeing? He looked at me, and the slightest hint of warmth touched his mouth. You. I hate to admit how hard it was not to smile. Behind me, 2 staff members were already trying to drag a nearby table closer to the VIP section. Stop, I called. Everyone froze. I scanned the room. Every guest table was full. There was exactly one empty chair. At the staff table, near the back. I pointed. There. The venue manager looked appalled. Ma'am, that's the staff table. I looked at Vikram. He looked at the chair. For one suspended second, the memory flashed between us both. Another ballroom. Another insult. Another chair. But this time there was no humiliation. No mother-in-law. No audience waiting to see social lines enforced. There was simply one empty seat where people were working and eating in shifts. Vikram nodded once. Perfect. He walked over and sat down. Just like that. No performance. No statement. No public rescue. He simply chose the available chair. And, because he did it without drama, it became more meaningful than the first time. The staff table went silent at first, understandably. One server stopped chewing mid-bite. My assistant looked like she might faint from secondhand social risk. A lighting tech sat so straight he resembled an accusation. Vikram unfolded his napkin. Please continue, he said. Nobody continued for at least 30 seconds. Then slowly humanity returned. Bread was passed. Water refilled. A coordinator explained a floral supplier problem. Someone laughed carefully. 2 hours later, when I finally got a break and walked over, there was one chair left beside him. Of course there was. You stayed, I said, sitting down. You sound surprised. You've been at the staff table for 2 hours. They're interesting. More interesting than the governor at the front. Considerably. I smiled despite myself. For a moment, we simply watched the room. My room. Not because I owned the venue, but because all around me were the visible results of something I had built. My staff moved with confidence. My systems worked. My team solved problems without waiting to be rescued. Clients trusted us. For the first time in my life, I understood what real power felt like. Not status borrowed from a husband's surname. Not access granted by rich families. Power built through competence, respect, and the refusal to collapse under other people's disrespect. Vikram understood that too. I think that's why he asked a few minutes later, "Have you eaten?" I narrowed my eyes. Don't start. You haven't. I had almonds. That is not dinner. It was 12 almonds. Show some respect. He signaled a passing server. A plate appeared in front of me. I turned slowly toward him. You did this. He looked innocent. I have no idea what you mean. You ordered me food. An outrageous allegation. You're becoming controlling again. I'm ensuring basic human survival. Business oversight? Exactly. I laughed. He shifted his chair slightly closer. I noticed. Said nothing. A minute later, movement near the ballroom entrance caught my eye. Arjun had arrived. He spotted me, smiled, and started walking over. At that exact moment, Vikram's chair moved another inch closer. I stared at him. He kept looking straight ahead. Did you just move your chair?
No.
You absolutely moved your chair. The floor is uneven. The floor is marble. A structural concern. I began laughing so hard I had to put down my fork. Here was this man, this terrifyingly composed, disciplined, strategic man, defending emotional territory with furniture. Arjun reached us just in time to notice the suspicious lack of space. "I was going to ask you to dance," he said. Vikram's expression became so neutral, it was practically a threat. I pretended to think carefully. Then I looked at Arjun. "Maybe later." He glanced at Vikram, then at the chair, then back at me and laughed. "I see. I'm being aggressively outmaneuvered by seating arrangements." "Seems so," I said. He bowed slightly. "I know when I'm defeated." When he left, Vikram remained dignified for exactly 3 seconds. "Maybe later?" I turned toward him. "Oh, this will be fun." "What does it mean?" "It means maybe later." "You don't dance." "I do sometimes." "I have never seen you dance." "You've also never seen me scuba dive." I blinked. "Do you scuba dive?"
No.
"That is irrelevant." I laughed again. Then, under the table, I reached for his hand. He stopped talking. Around us, no one cared where we sat. No one was measuring my worth against access. No one was deciding whether I belonged. And maybe that was the real ending to the chair story. Not that he once moved his chair publicly to reject someone else's cruelty, but that months later, he could sit beside me quietly, with no audience and no need to prove anything, simply because that was where he wanted to be. Our love story did not repair itself in one confession. That would have been easier, and easier stories are rarely true. We rebuilt in fragments, in patience, in awkward honesty, in the discipline of not pretending. Forgiveness and trust are identical. One rainy evening, after a corporate event, I found him in an empty ballroom stacking chairs with one of the venue staff because they were short-handed. He looked absurdly serious about it. I leaned in the doorway and said, "Your business oversight has become suspiciously manual." He glanced over. "I'm broadening my operational profile. At this rate, you'll soon qualify for part-time event labor." I'm adaptable. I walked in slowly, heels in one hand, blouse sleeves rolled back, tired in the familiar way that comes from finishing something difficult well. The staff member excused himself, perhaps sensing he had wandered into emotionally loaded territory. When we were alone, I looked at the chairs he'd stacked. "Crooked." He turned. "They are not crooked. They are emotionally crooked." He almost smiled. Then the humor faded. He rested one hand on the back of the final chair and said, "Riya." That tone. Serious. I put my shoes down. "What?" He was quiet for a moment. The way men are when they know words can still fail them but want to risk them anyway. "I used to think protecting you meant removing every obstacle." I said nothing. "I thought if something hurt you, I should destroy it, fix it, replace it, silence it." "That does sound like you." "Yes." He looked down briefly, then back at me. "But when you lost that contract and refused my help, I understood something I should have understood much earlier." I waited. "If I solve everything for you," he said, "then your victories begin to belong to me. Even your dignity becomes something dependent on my power." The room felt very still. I had waited a long time to hear something like that. Not because I needed him to repeat my own values back to me, because I needed to know he finally understood the injury beneath the injury. When his family insulted me, that was pain. When he failed to trust me, that was betrayal. But when he instinctively tried to rescue me from the consequences of my own principles, that was something subtler and almost as dangerous. Erasure. He took a step closer. "I don't want you beside me because I put you there," he said. My breath caught. "I want you beside me because you choose to be." And for the first time in all the months since our separation, I had no witty answer. No sarcasm. No elegant shield. Only truth. So I stepped forward and touched his hand. He looked down at that small contact as if it mattered more than he knew how to say. "You've improved," I whispered. "At what?" "Listening." He exhaled. "I was already excellent at listening." "No," I said softly. "You were excellent at waiting silently until people agreed with you." That actually made him laugh. A real laugh. not the restrained shadow of one. Then he became serious again, and the softness in his face frightened me more than his certainty ever had. Because anger I could survive. Tenderness from someone who had once broken my trust? That required courage. I rose on my toes and kissed him. Just once. Lightly. A question, not an answer. When I stepped back, he looked almost dazed. I smiled despite myself. Are you all right? Yes. You look confused. I'm not confused. You look very confused. He touched my wrist. I'm reconsidering the duration. I laughed. Then he pulled me gently back toward him and kissed me again, longer this time, with the strange reverence of a man who has learned that love is not possession, not rescue, not entitlement, but permission you continue earning. From the far side of the ballroom, someone opened a side door, saw us, and shut it again immediately. Probably one of the staff. We both ignored it. That night, nothing dramatic happened. No promise of forever. No speech. No cinematic vow. We left separately. That was important too, because real healing is rarely theatrical. It is consistency with better behavior. Still, something had changed. Not just between us. Inside us. I was no longer the woman who wanted to be believed by his family. I no longer wanted entry into rooms that valued me only when invisible. I had built my own room, and Vikram, finally, was learning how to enter it without taking over. Kamini saw all of this, of course. Toxic mothers do not become harmless just because life humiliates them publicly. Sometimes exposure only makes them quieter and more dangerous. After the gala scandal, her social status weakened, but it did not disappear overnight. Women like Kamini always have backup friendships built on years of favors, secrets, and exchanged appearances. What changed was power. Her words no longer carried the same unchallenged authority. Her certainty no longer made other people automatically align. Still, she watched. And she hated what she saw. Not just that Vikram and I were finding our way back toward each other. What she hated most was that he was changing because of me. A controlling mother can tolerate a daughter-in-law who is weak because weakness can be managed. She can tolerate a son's infatuation if she believes it will fade back into obedience. What she cannot tolerate is a woman who teaches her son to see the mother clearly. One afternoon, about 2 months after the gala scandal, Kamini requested a private meeting. Not at the family home. Not at a restaurant. At a temple courtyard cafe, because she understood the strategic value of holiness as scenery. I almost declined. Then I decided I was done avoiding unfinished ghosts. She was already seated when I arrived, draped in muted silk, looking smaller than I remembered, and somehow no less dangerous. You came, she said. You asked. She gestured to the chair. Sit. I remained standing for a second longer than politeness required. Then I sat. She folded her hands. I made mistakes. That surprised me enough that I almost showed it. Almost. Did you? I said. Her eyes sharpened faintly. She was not used to apologies being treated as opening offers. I was trying to protect my family, and sacrificing me felt efficient. A flicker of irritation crossed her face. Good. I did what mothers do. No, I said. You did what frightened people do when they think status matters more than truth. Her mouth thinned. You always had a sharp tongue. And you always called your cruelty concern. For a moment, something raw moved beneath her composure. Maybe shame. Maybe only the shock of being spoken to without fear. I never wanted this marriage, she said. I laughed once. That much was clear. You were too independent. There it is. You had no instinct for fitting in. No, I said. I had no instinct for disappearing. That landed exactly where I wanted it to. She looked away. When Vikram married you, she said slowly, I thought he was choosing difficulty. And now? Her answer took time. Now I think he was choosing someone braver than he was. I had not expected honesty. Certainly not from her. The courtyard around us felt suddenly very quiet. She continued, I thought if I pressured you enough, you would become easier. Softer. More appropriate. I leaned back. And when that failed, She met my eyes. I blamed you for not braking correctly. There are apologies that heal. There are apologies that simply confirm damage. This was the second kind. I nodded once. Thank you for finally saying it plainly. She looked down at the untouched tea between us. I know he loves you. The statement was not generous. It was a surrender. I said nothing. She looked up again. If you come back to him, you will never truly come back to me. That, at least, was honest. I stood. I was never coming back to you. For the first time, pain showed clearly on her face. Not because she loved me, because she had lost the power to define the terms. I left her there with the tea growing cold. And as I walked out of the courtyard, I realized something unexpected. I no longer needed her apology. She could never restore what she took. But she could no longer control the story either. That was enough. The official divorce date approached quietly. Lawyers sent emails. Drafts were revised. Assets were reviewed. Technical endings are strangely boring for something as emotionally expensive as a marriage. By then, Vikram and I had not defined anything. We spoke often, worked together sometimes, ate together occasionally, kissed twice more, argued 3 times, laughed far more than either of us expected. But neither of us had said, clearly, what came next. Perhaps because naming hope after betrayal feels risky. Perhaps because we both knew love is easier to feel than rebuild. The final decision came on a Sunday afternoon in my office. Everyone else had gone home. Invoices were spread across my desk. Fabric swatches covered the side table. One shoe lay under the filing cabinet because I had kicked it off in frustration 40 minutes earlier. Vikram arrived with food. Not flowers.
Food.
That was smarter. He set the containers down and looked around. You live like a legal dispute with stationery. I'm thriving. He sat across from me. For a while we ate in silence. Then he slid the divorce draft toward me. I looked at it, then at him. So, this is romantic. He didn't smile. I told my lawyer to wait. My fork paused. Why? Because I don't want this. A long silence settled. He kept going before I could interrupt. That doesn't mean I think wanting is enough. It isn't. It doesn't mean I deserve another chance because I finally understand what I did wrong. Understanding late is still late. I put the fork down slowly. He met my eyes. But if there is any part of you that believes what we had can be rebuilt differently, I'm asking you not to end this on paper just because we already broke it in life once. My throat tightened. There are moments when the entire emotional architecture of your future seems to balance on a sentence. This was one. I asked the only honest question. If we try again, what changes? He answered without hesitation. My mother does not get to shape our life. Good. My family does not get silent access to my loyalty over you. Better. If I doubt, I speak. If I fail, I answer for it. If you say no, I listen. If you say wait, I wait. If you say leave, I leave. If you say stay, I stay. My eyes burned. He glanced at the unsigned paper between us. And if you decide none of this is enough, I will sign whatever you want and spend the rest of my life being grateful you taught me what I should have known sooner. No one had ever spoken to me like that. Not because he sounded grand. Because he sounded stripped of pride. Which is rarer. I looked down at the draft. Then I tore it in half. His breath caught. Don't look so pleased, I said, voice unsteady. This is not a happy ending. It is probation. For the first time in months, the smile that broke over his face was completely free of caution. I can work with probation. You'll have terms. I assume they are punitive. Severely. He laughed softly. Then more quietly, Riya. Yes. Thank you. I shook my head.
No. Don't thank me yet.
Deserve it. He nodded. I intend to. And somehow, that was more romantic than any proposal. A year later, Bellamy Events opened its second office. Mega cried during the ribbon cutting. I pretended not to and then cried too. We had 23 permanent staff, 3 seasonal teams, a waiting list, and a reputation for excellence that no one any longer framed as surprising for someone with my background. The work had become bigger.
So had I.
Vikram never once used his name to accelerate my business. Not publicly. Not privately. He recommended us only when directly asked, and even then, always disclosed the relationship. He refused to sit on any financial board touching my company. He never blurred my success with his support. That restraint was its own kind of devotion. As for us, we did not return to the old marriage. We built a new one. Different house. Different boundaries. No shared address with family. No automatic attendance at set the obligations. No pretending peace existed where accountability did not. Some relatives vanished from our life entirely.
Good.
Naina eventually reached out with something halfway between apology and self-awareness. I accepted the honesty, not the history. Rohit faced legal consequences. Kamini lived in a quieter social world, still elegant, still proud, but permanently altered by the day truth took the microphone from her. Sometimes people ask whether I forgave her. The answer is complicated. I released the need to keep bleeding from what she did. That is not the same as trust. Trust is earned. Distance is sometimes wisdom. And karma does not always arrive by destroying people completely. Sometimes it arrives by forcing them to live without the illusion that made them powerful. That was Kamini's punishment. Not poverty. Not prison. Irrelevance. Which, for a woman who once lived by deciding where everyone else belonged, was almost poetic. One evening, long after the scandals had quieted and life had settled into something steadier, Vikram and I attended another wedding. A large one. Important families. Too many flowers. The usual. Halfway through dinner, I noticed him glancing at the seating chart stand near the entrance.
What?
I asked. He nodded toward a gold-framed chart displaying guest names. Do you remember, he said, the first time I moved a chair for you? I smiled faintly. Hard to forget. Your mother nearly combusted. He looked at me with that quiet warmth I still hadn't entirely learned to receive without feeling something ache. At the time, he said, I thought I was correcting her. You were. He shook his head. Only partly. I waited. He reached beneath the table and took my hand. I was also correcting myself. That stayed with me. Because he was right. The chair had never mattered only because he publicly rejected her cruelty. It mattered because in choosing where to sit, he had also begun choosing the kind of man he wanted to become. Not the one who inherited power. The one who learned where not to place it.
The music changed.
Guests began drifting toward the dance floor. Vikram stood and held out his hand. I looked up at him suspiciously. You don't dance. I do sometimes. I still don't believe that. You have seen me change more serious habits. That was unfortunately true. I let him pull me up. We moved into the crowd. Not dramatic, not youthful, not trying to look like one of those love stories rewritten by wealth. Just us. Two people who had loved badly, hurt deeply, learned painfully, and chosen anyway. As we swayed under the lights, I thought of the woman I had once been at that first engagement. Tired. Humiliated. Standing because someone told her she did not belong at the family table. If I could speak to her now, I would not tell her karma is coming. I would not tell her the truth will win. I would not tell her love returns wiser. All of that is too easy. I would tell her something simpler. Hold your dignity even when no one claps for it. Because the people who punish you for having self-respect are usually the very people terrified of facing their own lack of it. And one day, whether in a ballroom or a courtroom or an office or the silence of their own home, that fear catches up with them. It always does. Kamini thought power meant deciding where I was allowed to sit. She was wrong. Power was surviving her. Power was building something she could not touch. Power was making clients apologize to staff. Power was looking at the family that sacrificed me and saying, you were never the prize. And love? Love turned out not to be the man who could command the room. It was the man who learned to sit beside me in it. At the head table. At the staff table. On the office floor at midnight eating cold noodles from a takeout carton while I edited timelines, and he checked guest transport spreadsheets because yes, he still did things like that. Sometimes he still moved his chair slightly closer and blamed the floor. I usually let him, not because I need the gesture, but because now I know what it means.
Not ownership.
Not rescue.
Choice.
And maybe that is the most beautiful revenge of all. The woman they once tried to make feel small did not come back asking for a seat. She built a room of her own. And the man who almost lost her forever? He learned that if he wanted to stay in that room, he would have to enter with respect. That is my story. Not of a perfect marriage, not of a rich family brought down in one meat explosion, but of a woman who chose dignity when it was expensive, truth when it was painful, and love only after it learned how not to crush her. And if there is one thing I know now, it is this. Karma does not always shout. Sometimes it walks into a ballroom in silk, takes the microphone, and finally tells the truth.